This is author, art and film theorist, and perpetual psychologist Rudolph Julius Arnheim. He was born July 15, 1904 in Berlin, Germany. Arnheim was born into a simple and loving family, but also a country of fighting and struggle. In fact, in 1918, 14-year-old Rudolph experienced Germany's violence firsthand when a bullet came crashing through his window. The German Kaiser had abdicated the throne, and people were fighting in the streets for control of the government. Dominating the struggle were the Social Democrats, who the following year established the Weimar Republic. The Weimar Republic lasted until 1933 when the Nazis came to power. It was an era of political and economic upheaval, or as Arnheim described it, anything that could be wrong was wrong. Arnheim was the son of a Berlin piano manufacturer who expected him to take over the family business. Young Arnheim, however, had other dreams. He wanted to go to the university. After secondary school, his father allowed him to attend the University of Berlin, as long as he spent half the week at the office. Arnheim's love for school soon overpowered his father's hopes of taking over the business. Arnheim recalls that he went more and more to the university and less to the office, until his father finally gave in and let him start his career. Arnheim's primary interest was psychology, which at the time was considered a branch of philosophy. He decided to major in psychology and minor in art and music history. Arnheim's attendance at the University of Berlin greatly influenced his later work. Among the faculty there were some prestigious people such as Albert Einstein, Max Planck, Max Wertheimer, and Wolfgang Kohler. Rudolph saw his time in the psychology department as a real workshop. All of us students served as subjects for our neighbors, and they in turn were subjects for our experiments. And so you sat there and didn't go much to lectures. It was a learning workshop, as Rudolph had described. And this type of progressive learning definitely influenced his philosophies and theories that he wrote about in his books. This learning by doing mindset that Arnheim had probably came from his experiences there. Another event that greatly influenced Arnheim was his visit to Bauhaus after he received his doctorate in 1928. Bauhaus was a very influential school in Europe, and he wrote 2 articles about his visit there, which he later published in 1932. Arnheim's first book, Film and Art, was published. However, when the Nazis took power in 1933, their first act was to dismiss Jewish university professors. Since Arnheim's ancestry was Jewish, the sale of his book was no longer permitted. He had no choice but to flee and move to Rome, where he spent the next 6 years writing about film with the League of Nations. Then, with the outbreak of World War II, he moved to London and served as a wartime translator for a British broadcasting corporation. After he finished his work in London, he decided it was time to move to the United States. In 1940, he only had $10 in his pocket, and he arrived in the United States. He was pleased with his decision, and he said that moving was the end of his exile. Rather than having to abandon his heritage, Arnheim was expected to possess the treasure of foreign skills and customs and enrich the sources of American living. And Arnheim did just that. Using his experience and all he had learned through his education, as well as his culture, he applied for and was granted 2 major awards. The first award was from the Rockefeller Foundation, where he analyzed soap operas, and the second was from the Guggenheim Foundation, which he studied the role and perception of art. After receiving those awards, he decided that he should write a book about applying the Gestalt theory to the visual arts. This was a quote from him. "The tools available in psychology of perception at the time were not sufficient to deal with some of the more important visual problems in the arts. Therefore, instead of writing the book, I undertook a number of particular studies, mainly in the areas of space, expression, and movement, designed to fill some of the gaps. So this is just going to talk about the Gestalt theory a little bit. Gestalt is a German word meaning the essence or shape of an entity's complete form. This theory was created at the Berlin School, which is probably where Arnheim learned it. And it is a theory of the mind and brain saying that the operational principle of the brain is holistic, parallel, analog, using physical representation with self-organizing tendencies. It refers to the form-forming capabilities of our senses, particularly with respect to the visual representation of figures and whole forms instead of just simple lines. A phrase that can help us understand this theory is the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. In 1951, he received his second fellowship from the Rockefeller Foundation, and it was here that he took a leave of absence from teaching. And during the next 15 months, he produced a book called Art and Visual Perception. This book was well accepted and was translated into 14 different languages and is considered possibly one of the most influential books of the century. And in this book, he tried to narrow the gap between scientific and artistic knowledge, to use this knowledge to better understand the arts while preserving intuition and self-expression. Like scientific discovery, artistic expression is a form of reasoning in which receiving and thinking are indivisibly intertwined. A person who paints, writes, composes, dances, thinks with their senses. Although Arnheim enjoyed writing, he decided to continue teaching. In 1968, Harvard University established a Department of Visual Arts and Environmental Studies and invited Arnheim to be a part of the faculty as a professor of psychology of art. Arnheim was active in the American Society for Aesthetics and served twice as their president. He was also the president of the Division of Psychology of Arts. Arnheim taught for 6 years at Harvard University before he retired and moved to Ann Arbor with his wife. He continued to be passionate about teaching even after he retired and taught for 10 more years as a visiting professor at the University of Michigan. Arnheim, he burst the conceptual bubbles of his time by showing how perception itself is a cognitive event and by reminding us that the creation of images in any medium requires discovery and imagination. As a result of his work, he found ideas that were of major importance for American education and also for classroom practice. The message that he wanted to convey was that vision itself is a function of intelligence, that perception is a cognitive event, and that interpretation of meaning are an indivisible aspect of seeing, and that the education process can foster all these human abilities. Furthermore, Arnheim gives us a view of art and mind that puts art, both creativity and perception, at the heart of education. So why did Arnheim believe that art was so important to education? One main reason he came up with after his research was that perception and creation of visual arts is a primary agent of development. We see this a lot today in that students who take band or art are more likely to get higher grades. Another thing he realized was that artists spend a lot of their lives in the study of visual structures and are experts on visual language. So in turn, the study of art is indispensable to every train and field of knowledge. I have looked at art education nearsightedly by discussing what it can do for other areas of learning outside the arts or receive from those areas. It is necessary, however, to see our special field as it is in place of just one aspect of Arnheim determined that education should operate as one of three central areas of learning intended to equip the young mind with basic abilities needed to cope successfully with every branch of the curriculum. The first area is philosophy, which instructs the students. The second area is visual training, where the students learn to handle visual phenomena. And the third area is language training, enabling students to communicate verbally the fruits of their thinking. Along with his ideas of art education, Arnheim also cultivated ideas about the role of a teacher. As teachers, Arnheim advises us that we cultivate various modes of thinking to to open up avenues through which ideas can be formulated. He also believed that a good instructor creates awareness, making sure the social, historical, and psychological materials to which the student is referred doesn't burden the curriculum with more learning. He further described his ideas of a teacher in this quote. As a warning to educators, the growth of a young mind is a delicate process, easily disturbed by wrong input at the wrong time. In the arts, as well as elsewhere in education, the best teacher is not one who deals out all he knows or withholds all he can give, but is one with wisdom of a good gardener who watches, judges, and helps out when help is needed. Even though Arnheim never pursued a career as an artist, he is seen as one of the most influential figures in art education. Many consider him a towering figure in the world of visual studies. He was among the first theorists to write significant ways about the media in the 20th century, a pioneer of the psychology of art with path-breaking books on visual perception and artistic creativity. He was one of the first to recognize the importance of film as a major art form and also was a great teacher admired by his students. His students described him as a devoted teacher who was easy to approach and willing to spend time. Arnheim was the author of 15 books, all of them very influential to generations of students, artists, and psychologists. Many consider his beliefs that the study of perception and thinking can illuminate art, and that psychologists can learn something about the perception and thinking from a careful study of art. Arnheim's work not only influenced psychologists, but also art historians, educators, graphic designers, architects, painters, color theorists, and art critics. Over the course of his lifetime, Arnheim provided a unique and inclusive view of what humans should do to create art, and what art does to create humans. Despite being a first-hand witness of some of the most tragic events in history and experiencing personal sadness as he outlived his 2 wives and also his daughter died in childhood. But despite all this, Arnheim loved life and he loved people. And at the very end of his 102 years, he enjoyed reading, discussing, writing, sketching, listening to music, and playing his violin. He described how he lived his life in the following quote: "My life has been one of contemplation rather than action, and since I watch artists who are contemplators, I am twice removed from this active life, because I observe the observers. I am a little owl perched on the shoulder of Athene."